Hello, everybody. Today, we're going to be talking about the NIS2 Directive and everything that you need to know that's involved with this. So we have some ICS experts here today that actually know quite a bit and have been very familiar with this on this project out of Europe. So first, I'm going to start off with Dean, if I can introduce you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, everyone. Hi, glad to be here. My name is Dean Parsons, certified SANS instructor. I teach two main classes with SANS. One is a very detailed technical class on incident response, 6-day class. Also the co-author and instructor for ICS 418. So 515, 418. What I want to bring today is the perspective from the critical infrastructure, essential services kind of side of the house today. Thanks for having me.
All right. And coming up next, we have Bojan.
So hi everyone, great to be here. As Dean, I'm also a certified SANS instructor. I'm also a co-author and I teach the web application pen testing course and I teach the red teaming course as well. I'm also located in Europe, in Croatia, which is, as we'll discuss later, one of the countries that actually transposed the NIS2 directive into a local law. So whatever I do, I'm quite involved with NIS2, and hopefully I'll be able to share some of the so far acquired knowledge in that area.
Hey, and I appreciate that. And so I'm actually the Director of Business Development over here on the certification arm, which you can see in the right-hand corner, which is GX certifications. So we're going to start off by just kind of doing a little bit of an intro on what NIS2 Directive is. So if you can see on here, it's a kind of a common level of cybersecurity within the EU critical infrastructure. The goal is to keep the EU and its citizens protected. Pretty simple. It is covered by any country within the EU, so that's 27 countries. That does not include the UK, which, as you can imagine, has been now removed from that. But those countries include Germany, Italy, Spain, Portugal. The list kind of goes on from there. So who is affected? It's any critical sector organization with over 50 employees. So a critical sector organization could be anything from tech, utilities, healthcare, retail. When you really think about it, almost any organization out there, for the most part, is considered a critical sector. So Dean, I see you kind of shaking your head a little bit. So the important
nodding in agreement for sure.
So the important date, which actually happens to be my anniversary, so it's easy to remember, hopefully, is October 18th, 2024. However, each individual country does have to do the legislation. So the belief is that about half of them are going to have it in about March 2025. And we're going to be talking about it quite a bit more of how does that affect you? Does it matter where I'm located? Things along those lines, because that's very much a very huge concern as far as what do I need to know? So if you see on here, you can see kind of what the NIS1 versus the NIS2 is as far as what kind of changes. However, you know, some of the big things that you need to know about is what is required. So ENISA is asking you to put together a yearly report. Some of the things that you want there in your yearly report is, how are you handling risk management? Do you have a critical incident plan? So if a critical incident, who's in charge? How does it get reported? How is the structure? You'd be surprised at how many people have critical incidents and they don't have a plan of how to do that. And they start kind of stumbling on each other. When does the lawyers get involved? When does the media get involved? You know, things way beyond cybersecurity. They also want to see about the expertise and the skills validation of the CISO, CIO, security teams. They also want to know how decisions are made, all the way up to the very top. That's the C-suite and especially the board. So how is the board of directors being advised? Do they have outside counsel, just inside counsel? Because ultimately the board is responsible. So if you have an incident, and this is actually the one that I've seen that is the biggest turnaround time compared to like the SEC and some of the other ones out there, you must report an incident within 24 hours of detection. Which I think is very interesting. So if you see on here, the big difference between NIS2 and NIS1 and NIS2 is I always kind of jokingly call it the Empire Strikes Back. I always have to throw a little Star Wars, thing in there, is that includes fines for not meeting requirements. NIST 1 was some recommendations. NIST 2 is actually considered regulation. The fines can be up to 10 million euros or 2% of revenue, which, as you can imagine, is a huge amount of dollars. This affects anything from medium-sized companies, public entities, digital providers. Like I said, any company with over 50 employees. And so, one of the things I always kind of say is, hey, this project sounds a little bit familiar from the standpoint of it's a little bit vague. We don't know kind of where it's going. And I always say, look at GDPR. GDPR was also an initiative out of the EU. It was vague out of the gate. As you can see, you would see some more kind of fine tuning over time. And so if you see on here, we already talked about the implementation. January 17, 2025 is a process for peer reviews. April 17, 2025, member states shall establish a list of essential and important entities. And then October 17th, 2027, which seems far off, and we always learn, hits us before you ever expect it, the commission shall review the functioning of this directive. So I'm going to start with the very first question, which is, and I'm just going to start really easy with a real one that I think should cover everything. What does the audience need to know to become compliant with NIS 2? So I figure I'd start with a really hard one and we'll kind of keep working from there. So who wants to hit that one first?
Sure. So maybe I can add a couple of things and then Dean just jump in if you see that there is something you want to add. Sure. So to be honest, like if your company already invested into, for example, ISO 27001, you kind of cover a lot of things that NIS2 relates to. And to be honest, for everyone who is perhaps already mature enough to kind of satisfy some of the older regulatory requirements, NIS2 as such shouldn't be too big of an issue for such a company. Now, if you take a look at this slide here, what you can see is that the scope has been expanded quite a bit to include a lot of sectors and services as either essential or important entities, but some of these which traditionally perhaps didn't think that much about security. So when you take a look at wastewater and waste management, perhaps food industry, I'm not saying that they don't pay attention to security, but they're probably not as maybe secure or regulatory required as maybe someone in energy sector or banking, finance, and so on. So even though the requirements here are maybe for us who have been in security for quite a while straightforward, for some of these companies they will require a huge investment into both technology and people in their companies. So the directive itself lists things such as risk management, for example, being the most important thing. And this is something that we should be doing from day one, but I'm sure that there will be many, many, many companies that will perhaps even hear about it for the very first time.
So I totally would agree with this. I think from my perspective, coming from the industrial control system side, I would agree that maybe there are some water sectors out there, even some energy sectors out there in power generation, transmission, distribution, that probably have security well on the way on the IT side of the house. And so what this includes now is risk management, incident response, reporting for the control systems or the OT side of the house as well. And rightfully so, this needs to encompass those environments because that is the business. And so having this, I'll say, increased scope or expanded scope to include that side is fantastic because it does drive additional cybersecurity. I think from my perspective, I think the challenge might be, to your point, is they're not necessarily or maybe haven't been looking primarily on the OT side for security. And it's great to have this approach here. And I think what I'm really trying to raise the flag on is if you take IT controls, like you mentioned before with ISO 27001 or other controls for IT, and you just copy and paste them into an OT or ICS environment, there's challenges that way. And so really what I'm kind of suggesting is that for sure this can be done, it can be doable, and it's leveraging what we have in place on IT, but I don't think it's a copy paste. There's absolutely a nuanced discussion to how to deploy these kinds of controls, or ICS or OT specific controls, to protect those utilities. So I think it's definitely doable for sure. And I think that it's really about prioritization. And I think we're going to get to that as we see to our survey questions and things as well. But I love the positive aspect that you have, which is if you're doing a lot of good things in security today, the objective here for NIS2 is not necessarily very far away for you. I think that you can use a lot of things already in place to get there for sure.
So let me ask the two of you, if you had to say a couple different things that you should do to meet NIS2, like what would you consider would be best practices, any recommendations you should focus on A, B, C, D? I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on that.
So I'll jump in. So from my perspective, I have a bias coming to this table because I do incident response regularly in control systems. And so I focus a lot on what we call the SANS 5 ICS cybersecurity critical controls. And those controls, similar to being compliant and putting the right controls in place, you can leverage those controls which are threat-based. So if I was to say that, where do you start? And there's a list of things you can do here. From my perspective, I love and I find there's value in focusing on incident response for these reasons. One, incidents have to be reported within 24 hours, as Brian mentioned. Being prepared for an incident. It's not if, it's when we know this. How to respond appropriately, which will include things like backup and response times, all of these things as well. And from the perspective of control systems and critical infrastructure, or the essential services or essential entities, as they call them here in NIS2, it's how do we appropriately communicate, which teams are involved. So to summarize in 5 seconds or less, I would absolutely focus on incident response. And here's the value: communication, responsibilities communicated, and doing a tabletop will show you where your gaps are. So you'll converge teams while you're doing exactly an exercise to understand where you might have gaps and identify the controls you already have in place. So I think an exercise in its response is very valuable in this case here, and you're going to hit a number of checkboxes and proper security when you execute a tabletop in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with Dean. And if you take a look at the directive, which if you just read through the whole directive, which can be a little bit boring, of course, because at the end of the day, it's a law, right? But there are kind of two things that jump out. One is incident handling, as already mentioned by Dean. The other one is risk management, and these two go together. Mm-hmm. So obviously, before we start investing anything into either IT or OT environment, doesn't matter which one it is, we want to have proper risk management so we know that our money that we invest at the end of the day and our time will be invested in something that actually adds value for the whole organization and environment. So these two things are absolutely, I think, a must. And I think that is what NIS2 is trying to stress out as well, that you need to perform proper risk management and you need to prepare for incidents. You need to be able to handle them. And that's why they put these very strict deadlines on first 24 hours for an early warning, then you have 48 hours for a notice. And at the end of the day, you have 30 days for the final report, which has to be delivered to your own national competency authority. And then they will distribute it further to ENISA. So this chain of incident reporting is now much more formalized. And I think that at the end of the day, once this gets into the game, everyone will benefit because ENISA will be able to aggregate all the data and distribute it to everyone. So hopefully everyone's security will be improved.
I would totally agree. And after, slamming back several coffees, for the last number of weeks, months on this, understanding this too, looking at the risk assessment piece and the risk management piece, they're really focused on validation. From my perspective, reading through and understanding, it's not just check, we're good, we're green. It's validation of the controls that are in place that are actually effective. And I think that's really important to bring out here, because I don't think this is just a compliance kind of like, you're good, you have it in place or you don't. It's if it's in place, great. illustrate how it's effective, illustrate the configuration, illustrate its effectiveness. So I think that's a really good point to kind of bring out. But I totally agree with you, and especially on the copy.
Absolutely, and good point. I just wanted to add one more thing.
Yeah.
We had the fines on the previous slide that we mentioned, and now with NIS2, it's not only the organization that can be fined, but also the responsible person in the organization. So if you're a CISO who actually just go there and put tick, 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 and then an incident happens later, and incident was due to something that you just put a take on, which actually wasn't implemented, then you're personally responsible as well, and there will be a personal fine against such a person as well. So yeah, one thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, for sure. If I can add one more thing to that, because I know Brian has another question for us coming up soon, is that from a leadership perspective, awesome. From a leadership perspective, so I teach ICS, is Security Essentials for Management. And so I meet with CISOs regularly. I meet with VP of Engineering. I'm on the plant floor regularly between teaches. And so what I'm seeing is that some new coming in CISOs, they might not have the knowledge of, well, IT is different than control systems. And 80% of the environments generally are different. And so what I'm finding is that, to your point about being penalized or fined here, is that it's really important that folks at the C-suite level embrace those differences, understand they're different, and just don't expect, just if you're good on IT, the same controls would be applicable on ICS. Check, you're moving on. Just want to make sure that if you're responsible for NIS2 on control system environments, OT environments, embrace the fact that IT and ICS are different, and then learn a little bit more about how to apply ICS specific controls. So I want to raise that flag here. I don't want to see any organization or person or people being fined in this case. So
absolutely.
So you're making my job very easy. So I love this discussion. I'm actually learning quite a bit myself. So so please keep the discussion going. So it's interesting. We talk a lot about critical incidents and when you have something that happens. And I think that's the more important piece. But I know that they talk about putting together a yearly report. Do you have any recommendations of what should be included in that yearly report?
So basically, I think most of the member states will still have to publish details on, like technical details on what kind of reports they're expecting. As we will see later, the transposition of the directive is not there yet, and we still have a lot of sub-acts to be applied over here. Now, one thing that's known for sure is that I already mentioned the deadlines that you have for reporting an incident, and in the report, obviously details about that incident will have to be shared with whoever is the local NCA, National Competency Authority for that particular member state, or their CCIRT. They will collect the reports, they will send the reports to ENISA, ENISA will aggregate the reports, and then they will publish probably a yearly report on this as well. So these, I believe, should be more or less standard incident reports, but in this particular case, they should not, or they don't need to contain a lot of technical details about what actually happened behind the hood. Again, the aspect here is more on risk management and how to improve security of all the member states, all the important and essential entities in different member states. So the fact that there was one unpatched server probably doesn't mean much for that particular case, but the fact that there were unpatched servers, that indicates that some other processes failed, and this is what needs to be improved.
If I could add to that, and fantastic points on this, is that the visibility is really important. So how does an organization actually know that they're compromised or not, or if there is some kind of intrusion? Me coming from the industrial control system side and looking at data from the last year and a half, 2-3 years on this, is that organizations today in utilities, as an example, which in this case is an essential service, essential entity, we're seeing organizations focus on tactically deploying technologies to obtain visibility, so they can actually detect, well, I do have a compromise. Here's where the vector is, and here's what happened as a result. So largely to what we talked about before, IT's got that stuff nailed down really well. And industrial control systems are kind of getting up to speed on visibility. And I'm speaking directly to a control we call in the community network visibility, or ICS visibility, or network security monitoring. That's ICS specific, understands the control systems. And so we've done the data research and an analysis, and over the next 18 months, that's one of the top things organizations are spending their money on tactically. So deploying these sensors in the ICS network visibility to understand, well, what metrics can I actually get? How do I know if I'm compromised? And of course, so I guess what I'm really saying here is that network visibility is obviously important for many reasons. It also gives us an understanding of if there's been compromises. So metrics are going to be important moving forward here. And I would suggest start capturing events of interest until you understand if they're an event, and then of course reporting based on that. So visibility is important, and what we talked about before, that regular, I'll say, investigation of incidents and events of interest, going to be a hotspot for sure.
Oh yeah, that's a great comment, and I would even perhaps go one step further and say that I still see a lot of IT environments which are missing proper visibility, not only OT, unfortunately.
But don't worry, NIS2 is going to help everyone here. It's going to be good. Yeah, it's going to be good, right? Yeah, I love it. Yeah,
it's like GDPR, right? It'll become the standard for the whole world. Is that fair to say? I always say, GDPR kind of became the standard in it. It affected the whole world. I kind of look at this NIS2 as the same way. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, actually, I was wondering, Brian, if I think we have some really good statistics in the survey data as well. With the time remaining, maybe we should pop there soon.
Yeah,
absolutely. To kind of get there.
Absolutely. Maybe just to add about covering the whole world. I'm not sure about that. We'll see. But as Brian mentioned earlier, the NIS2 directive. Sure, it affects every EU member state, but if you are a US company, for example, that does a lot of business in the EU, if you provide essential services in the EU, then you will be affected as well. If you are, for example, a provider of something for another company in the EU, and NIS2 puts a lot of emphasis onto supply chain incidents, then obviously you might be involved in this as well. So it doesn't matter really if you are located in the EU or not. If you do a lot of business in the EU, you should be aware of NIS2 and the requirements.
Fantastic.
Yeah, because that's actually a very interesting, and I know we kind of touched upon it. So I hear all the time, well, I'm in Spain and Spain hasn't taken the initiative yet, or take whatever country it is. And so should I be worried about this NIS2 directive, right? The whole idea is who does it affect, what countries, how soon, that type of stuff. So do you mind going a little bit into that? Because I know I hear that all the time of, yeah, but it doesn't really affect me. It's not going to hit my country for a while.
So, I think as you can see here, there are currently only 3 member states that transposed the NIS2 directive into their national law. Hungary, which was I think the first one, then Croatia, and then Belgium literally a week or 2 ago, something like that. Now all the other countries actually worked on transposing the directive into their national law, but adding something into a national law is actually quite complex and obviously takes some time. That being said, it will be transposed for sure. There might be some dates later which could be maybe modified, because at the end of the day, it will be again the national authority which will impose everything on the local essential and important entities. But it is coming for sure. And I think at this point in time, even though when you say that something will happen in 2025, and we might think, it's only next year, that will come sooner rather than later, right? So I expect that we should, or I think we should be really prepared for this. So if you maybe go to the next slide, just to perhaps touch a little bit on the example here in Croatia, as I'm a local here, obviously I was quite a bit exposed to this, and you can see how what the timeline looks like with the law over here. So it was transposed to a national law on 15th of February this year, and the sub-acts should be finalized until 17th of October. And the funny thing is that the transposition of the directive itself, you can read the directive and it's probably 95% same as the directive. So that's not all that different. And you can already prepare for that. But these sub-acts are what a lot of people actually want to see, because they will define those important details that we need to know about and that we can actually work on later. So again, we can see that the classification of essential and important entities must happen until March 2025 over here. And that will be the date when the national authority will actually say which entity is essential and what entity is actually important. Of course, some of them can already know that they are either essential and important. And if you are listening to this webcast from Netherlands, for example, there is a really nice online questionnaire that is available in Netherlands that you can go through, fill in, and then you will see what is your status, even though they haven't transposed the directive yet, but they're already working quite a bit on this. So again, there might be some delays here. Transposing the law is like a hard deadline, and that will happen for sure. I think these sub-acts might be delayed a little bit, which means that we'll kind of see what will happen in next year. But I would definitely advise against just waiting, and perhaps relaxing a lot until this hits, because it can hit hard depending on what your current maturity level is. So, yeah, other than this, I think we have a couple of cool questions from our survey, which was quite big, and there were some really, really interesting findings over there. So maybe, Brian and Dean, we should go through some of the questions and answers.
Yeah, sounds good. So really this survey that we put out, I guess about a couple months ago now, it's just recently closed, and we're actually right now going through the details of this. We grabbed a couple quick things from that survey, but the result of the survey is going to be pushed out into a published white paper, and that white paper is going to provide information like guidance, recommendation, what data is in the actual survey, what we're seeing as challenges that people face, and so on. And so that white paper is coming up soon, so that's awesome. So keep an ear out to that one. But just for the initial findings right now, we're going to go back and forth on a couple of these. So obvious question is, how serious does organizations today in the region or not working with the region consider the current cyber threats to be? And we've seen this over the last number of years because we do other surveys in IT and in ICS as well. This is consistently growing, and I don't think anybody would think this is a surprise. So almost 40%, 37% think right now it's severe in this case, the threats and the current threat landscape. And almost 47%, but almost 50% consider it to be high. So there is justification here of why NIS2 matters, why there's a change from NIS to NIS2, and really kind of focusing on the need to do additional protection response in this case as well. So, so this is very clear. If we go to the next one, and I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on this, but if you want to take this one, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, I think no one will question the fact that there are so many incidents lately. And I know that my incident handling team in my company, I don't think they had a free weekend for last 6 months at all. Because every single incident happens on Friday, right?
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, it's brutal. Yeah,
I'm sure that you are quite aware of that. Yeah. So
good news is there's people out there that they're the help, right? Like we do the same, and it's the same thing. So absolutely. Really glad that there's people to help in these situations, internal or externally. Yeah, absolutely.
This finding here was quite nice in my opinion. I was expecting that people will be more negative towards any regulation that happens, really, and especially a big one such as NIS2. But the survey actually showed that 60% are very positive and think that we actually needed this. 38% is neutral, right? Okay, business will continue as usual. Perhaps I'm already there on the maturity level, so this doesn't bring anything new to me. But these two together, this is 98% of people that filled in the survey who actually think that this is kind of neutral or positive thing. There are only 2% of people who thought that we shouldn't have the NIS2 directive, which I think shows that we are kind of going in the right direction.
100%. Yeah, there's buy-in, there's support for it, there's justification. Totally agree on this. This is really positive. Glad to see this.
Yep, that's cool. Well, let's see what's next.
So what challenges does the organization face today with its readiness to comply and implement the mandatory requirements for NIS2 directive by that date, right? Put it in your calendars. It's probably already October 17th of this year. So really there's two main things we pulled out of the report and the survey, more coming on this in the white paper. Currently, the lack of resources to implement those newly defined controls. So 45% are indicating lack of resources to implement those controls right now for NIS2, which is somewhat alarming given the status of like what month we're in right now. So this is June, right? So we're coming up on October, but I think that people can kind of reach out and kind of handle this. And the good news is, again, maybe there's things already kind of in the organization you can kind of adapt, but hopefully this can be mitigated as people move forward. Number two, no surprise here, if there's a lack of funding in some cases, but if there's a lack of resources, you could be seeing a lack of budget. So lack of budget for the implementation and maintenance. So that's a big thing here. The implementation is one thing and the ongoing maintenance is another, but around 40%. So 37% now really find that there's a lack of a budget for implementation and maintenance right now to meet that goal in October and maintain it moving forward. So this is, while it's positive, people agree with the NIS2 kind of framework and directive, there is a couple concerns there as well as we kind of go through. Do you guys have any questions or comments on this one?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would add is definitely that, among other things that we already mentioned, like risk management and incident handling, in the directive, there is actually quite of emphasis on education as well. So the directive recognized that, we are missing resources, we are missing expertise. We know how many people in security we miss, and those numbers only get worse every single day. So there is a lot of emphasis on education of both employees, but also the C-level stakeholders that need their knowledge actually to properly manage these risks. So I think this is also recognized by people that filled in the survey that by resources they also meant obviously the staff with knowledge to implement these newly defined controls.
Yeah, the knowledge and awareness education for sure. Brian?
Yeah, so let me ask you, this has been a question I've been thinking for a little while. So sometimes one of the frustrations is out there is the CISOs, the security team leads, feel like they're not getting the support they need by the C-suite, by the board of directors. I'd love to hear of like what recommendations do you have out there of what should you be talking to your C-suite, your board of directors? Is there anything you should be focusing on? What really matters to them? How do you talk their language? How do you talk in such a way that it's actually going to have an impact, right? Clearly you can't talk techie with them, right? You got to talk numbers, you got to talk something that's really going to affect their world. So I'd love to kind of hear like what recommendations have you done in the past that have really worked well?
Sure. I'll go first just quickly here. I think we have 10 minutes left there. So just from my perspective, talking with CISOs, VP of engineering folks regularly, on the industrial control system side, everything that engineers do, everything utilities do on that operational side is tied back to safety. Safety is first, period, full stop. And so security supports that. So at the board level, they're concerned about risk, and that risk translates from a safety event, such as injury on site, death, things of those natures. So from a risk management perspective, I would highly recommend focusing on what cyber impacts can introduce and have consequences related to safety. And that bubbles quickly up to the board as a risk that they probably do not want to accept in many cases, right? So highly would recommend on the ICS side, focusing on safety. And I guess the next big thing is, and I've said this before, but a tabletop does many things rather than just only focus on, do we have a plan in place? How do we execute it? Who's involved? It actually communicates the roles, responsibility, and identifies, you know what, in the control system today, maybe in water, wastewater management, electric power systems, we don't have visibility. Those things bubble to the top really quickly as high-level gaps, which can be translated into, in some cases, well, because we have no visibility, aka no network visibility in the ICS, we cannot tell you if we have an incident or not. We cannot tell you if there's an increased risk of safety. So from my perspective, I see those kinds of conversations regularly happening at the board level in mature organizations. Now, to answer your question directly, Brian, that will obviously push risk mitigation strategies and funding and educational requirements down to folks beyond the C-suite.
Yeah, I mean, Dean covered almost everything, and I'm also a big fan of these tabletop exercises as well. One thing that almost always helps with management, of course, is any regulation that is imposed, and this is something that you can't really ignore. So one of the things that I would perhaps recommend to listeners and viewers is to really use the NIS2 directive and some of the items that are already specified there as being important. And we already mentioned education, risk management, incident handling. There are also a couple of other things like basic hygiene, visibility, which is actually really mentioned, as Dean already covered that, and even things like multi-factor authentication. So these are explicitly mentioned in the directive, and they can be good initial items of discussion with something that we need to invest into. But of course, based on risk management, and at the end of the day, perhaps these tabletop exercises, which will show to you what are your weak points. I'm a big fan of tabletop exercises.
Excellent. Same here. I do them regularly as well, and there's so much value, low-hanging fruit. High return of investment, not a lot of time required. Huge value in setting the direction and a roadmap. But you mentioned something really good there, which was like a control, multi-factor authentication. So we have another survey question coming up. I'm not sure if it's the next one, but it's coming up soon about what controls do you have in place. It's after this one, but right here we go. So we actually asked the question. So of the designated measures the organizations have right now already implemented, and what are you doing to kind of implement before that deadline? Already implemented, as you mentioned, nailed it, multi-factor authentication, which is very interesting because we live in this connected world now. Just a side note on the industrial control system side, one of the 5 ICS critical controls is secure remote access. Really happy to see that folks have already implemented this in some organizations in this region. And we mentioned as well, incident handling. So bonus on that. Tabletops will ignite that further, and basic policies and procedures as well. So I'll talk to the already implemented ones, as I mentioned. I'll pass the next few off if you like as well to take a look at the ready to implement by October. What do you think?
So one thing to add to this slide here that I'm actually not surprised about is that supply chain controls are not there yet. Even though I think everyone was quite aware, perhaps somewhere in the back of their head, about potential issues with supply chain security. I think in the last few years, we were witnesses of some really, really high-profile incidents. The last one, actually, I presented on this show as well about the XZ library, which was so scary that made me wonder if there is actually even a way to prevent such attacks. So I'm happy to see that people are kind of ready to implement this, and that they're working and recognizing the importance of supply chain security as well. And obviously, it's part of the directive as well. So that's emphasized as well.
Excellent. One other point on this one, because I only think we have 4 minutes left there, is 2 things. One, the incident reporting workflows on the bottom there, as we talked about, like there's this whole flow of reporting structure, understanding the incident, who's involved, communications, as Brian mentioned, external to the organization, when legal is involved, etc. Fantastic information on this. So I had one other point before we do like a call to action for users here is the use of cryptography. I'm really happy to see that encryption is included in NIS2, and I'm really happy to see where there's an asterisk and it says where feasible. So those coming into this session, understanding NIS2, if you're in critical infrastructure, realize that encryption internally in the control system may give you low return of investment. So be very careful on that. Site-to-site encryption is important, but just have a nuanced approach when you're talking control systems on that case. So I want to give it back to you guys. What do you think from a call to action perspective? What can people take from this right now to start actioning? I think one of them is tabletops, but what do you think, guys, with the few minutes we have left here?
Well, I mean, yeah, you mentioned tabletops, and I did mention tabletops several times as well. Yep. I think, obviously, most of our listeners probably have some risk management procedures already in their company, but this is something that they should perhaps pay some attention to make sure that it is on the level that they're happy with. And again, perhaps try to just take one step back and maybe see what is the current maturity level of your company. Talk to your C-level management and see what will be the best winning points to actually get as close to the NIS2 directive as possible. Obviously, no one can do everything. So again, that's why we have risk management as an important component to make sure that we invest into things that we can actually help with. And again, this finding here on the slide kind of covers what we already discussed. It's very nice to see that all of the people that filled in the survey agree with us that they want increased visibility. And as I said again, I think we should have that visibility not only in the IT environment, but also in the OT, as you mentioned, because I still see it missing in the IT environment, and investing in cybersecurity education, quite important. And again, as I said, it's in the NIS2 directive, something that we shouldn't actually ignore.
Yep, fantastic. And I think if there's anything I'd leave anybody with is, again, just to reiterate, the people that provide that visibility, they're also going for training in this particular area, whether it be IT and or OT or ICS, whatever. It's putting the tools in place, but making sure that IT has someone to manage those controls, similarly with the ICS side. So I guess what I'm really saying is a lot of coffee, wait for the white paper to come out, right? Look at your areas based on risk and penalties in some cases as well. And please connect with us, because we will be dropping that finalized white paper soon on this. And that white paper is going to be guidance, recommendations as we go through. And it's going to be from a risk perspective on IT and the industrial control system side. So from my perspective, this can be definitely doable, even though there are some struggles there. There's a lot of positivities we've seen before too. So a lot of folks are aligned with why this is important. They're on board with this. It makes sense. And I think it's the right time. So I think we're in a good spot. Brian, anything you want to leave anybody with as we close out?
Yeah, so we do actually have a whole page that's just dedicated on resources. We're building as we go along. So you'll already see that there's quite a bit of resources. So for example, the survey results will be posted on that site. If you just go to SANS.org, it's, /NIS2. I do recommend, I would check it out periodically, because just like anything, we keep building and building and building as time goes on. And so, hopefully that also helps you with some of the conversations with your staff, with the board of directors, with the C-suite, some of that type of stuff. But, we have webinars, we have blogs, we have resources, we have a whole bunch of things, even bringing in the folks from ENISA to talk about it.
Excellent.
So any parting thoughts? I know we have 30 seconds, so...
Yeah, this is doable. Drink coffee, do tabletops, and take a risk-based approach. I think that's important. If you're ICS specific, really consider the tactical elements of the 5 critical controls for ICS first as you go through. That'll improve your ability to be compliant here.
Absolutely. Dean mentioned everything, even the coffee, the most important ingredient. Don't just wait for 2025. Start right now, because sooner we all start. I mean, we get benefits immediately because we are making our organizations more secure, no matter NIS2 directive or not. So let's not wait until an incident happens. Let's go through all of this before that.
Well said.
Well, beyond that, I was going to say thank you two, for both of your time. I actually learned quite a bit on this, so I appreciate your time. And, like I said, for the audience, look forward to, we're going to have a whole bunch of new resources on top of the ones we already have. So thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thanks so much, everyone. All the best.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hi, everyone. I'm Megan Tudge. I'm part of the SANS team based in Europe. I've been working at SANS looking at behavior change across a number of years, in fact, over a decade. We've got a number of customers that we work with to look at their awareness programs, from developing training for their entire population to understand and know how to behave around cyber risk. My smallest customer is 19 people, my largest 250,000 across the globe. And yet we see similar conversations in all of my different customers. One of the things we're encountering at the moment is a huge technology shift with AI and how it impacts all the population and the companies. AI technology is both a solution and a risk. And here at SANS, we've been going through a pivot to look at how do we embrace it, both in the knowledge that our experts have, how they're encountering it in the field, right the way through how we train about it and how we adopt it ourselves. And recently, I loved the discussion on a podcast a few weeks ago on this channel with Jarek Beeson and Gotha Sadir, looking at how CISO's perspective of how to adopt to AI and keep it secure. And from my side, it's also even more interesting because people adopt to change, especially technology change, in very different manners. And that means that actually you're seeing different populations in each company respond differently, from the early adopters who are jumping on new technology, but also probably developing shadow IT and huge risks for the company, through to the general population who are taking it step by step and need to be advised, to the resistors, shall we say, who probably almost think it's conspiracy. So looking at how people learn and how they respond in situations like that is something that we've been looking at and working on. And from our point of view, SANS has wanted to share our findings and also help customers in this new environment. To that fold, we've actually launched 2 new awareness products focusing specifically on AI. The first is the AIS 247, which is AI Essentials for Leadership. And this is looking at the perspective of leadership on what they should know, what they should evaluate for their companies. And now this week, on the 24th of June, we're going to be launching a new product looking at AI Security Essentials, role-based training, so that you have got coverage for all of your population. The AI Security Essentials role-based target is all of your staff. The AI Security Essentials is focused on targeting all of your staff across the business. We've got training for both IT admins all the way through to customer service. It's set up to run as awareness programs, so it can be run on the SANS platform, but it also can as easily be installed into a customer's learning platform. And it's set up so it's modular, so people can consume it in and around their roles, and probably the estimate is around 40 minutes training time overall. How it's built is with a SANS expert, Dan DeBubian, who is our head of innovation, plus an avatar presenting the concepts and also the discussions for each of the points. It has 8 modules. The first 3 focus for everyone, looking at understanding generative AI, looking at safe and exceptional use, and also prompt engineering, because that is so key to using the tool successfully. The next 5 modules focus on specific roles. So there's one for engineers or developers, including coding. There's another one for HR, as they have to think about IP, and also things for content creators, sales, marketing, and leadership. As you can see, I'm really excited about this development. And if you look below, there are the details in case you want to know more about this. And myself and the team would love to discuss your programs and how you're adapting to AI and how we can help you inspire your staff to know what to do and do it confidently and securely. Thank you so much for having me on the show today.